This is going to be some philosophical reflections on the nature of time, very much from the perspective of contemporary analytic philosophy, a particular brand of philosophy. So most work in philosophy begins with some common conception of time. So amongst all the variety of ways we experience time and think about time, the idea is there is some common core to what time is like. Usually it involves the idea that there is some shared special present that we all experience at once, that time flows, future events kind of come towards us and recede into the past, and also that the future is, distinctly different from the past. The future is open, uncertain, something we might control. The past is something fixed and settled. And for a long time, most of our work in philosophy of time consisted in kind of laying out more details of this conception. And we developed particular pictures. One of them conceives of time as something like a growing block, which you sort of add slices to as the future goes on. Another thought of time as a moving spotlight, kind of illuminating different slices of the universe at different times to represent the flow of time. And so things went on for a while. And the idea was these pictures of time would kind of directly mirror what our experience of time was like. But a lot of this changed around the beginning of the 20th century. And objections could have been raised earlier, but it was really physics coming along with theories like special relativity and general relativity that just put in question a lot of that way of thinking about time. So in particular, special relativity is going to tell you there is no shared present we could all experience because there aren't even shared moments at any time. There is no frame-independent simultaneity, if you want to put it in technical terms. But either way, there is no particular slice of time that we all share at once that could be called the present. General relativity created even more problems. It told us there was no flow of time that was independent of how we were moving through time. So it seemed like everyone was living in their own kind of independent temporal experiences at the very least, and there was no objective picture of time having the features I mentioned. To highlight one in particular, there was especially no difference between the pastward and future direction of time. Time looked equally the same going both directions. And this seemed radically at odds with our experience of time, and that presented quite a trouble. Were we to claim that our experience of time was merely an illusion, something we were very misguided about, or should we dismiss the physics and say that it was telling us about something but maybe not time, because it didn't have the features that we wanted? And there's been different responses philosophers have made. Some have indeed dismissed the science and said this just isn't about time. The approach I favor, and the one I'll say a bit about now, is one that says, no, take on board the science as telling you some features of time, but don't leave the story there. Get very interested in how it is that we come to have the experiences of time we do, given we are living in a world with time as the physics tells us. So just to give a sort of flavor of how that might look, one of the ideas is that, look, because of the way we experience things very quickly, because our brains process perceptual information so quickly, and because of the way decisions work, we can, you and I, sort of think of ourselves as inhabiting a shared present, which we both experience and act in at the same time, and it's the same for you and same for me. Even though in theory, time is a bit different for you as it is for me, we can kind of act as if we share a present. It's not a mistake, it's not an illusion, it's exactly how time would look if you were to live in this world. When it comes to the flow of time, how it seems to us that future events are approaching, I think a lot of sense can be made of that by thinking of our lives as being themselves stretched out through time. If you think about the way we live, the way we acquire memories, the way our beliefs about the future change and the way we have expectations, we do think of the world itself as changing over time, when in a way what's really going on is, we ourselves are growing and aging through time and changing our experience. And our sense of time itself as flowing is really about ourselves changing through time. And finally, and this is the area that I love to work on the most, the asymmetries in time. People will differ as to how much the differences between the past and future are due to us and how much they're due to the world. But I think a promising story, begins with some things that are true about the world namely the way entropy increases towards the future, entropy roughly being a measure of disorder. Given the way entropy behaves, we're going to have other asymmetries in play as well. And they include things like the way we can have records of the past and not in the same way of the future, the way we and other things can control future events, but at least not in the same way past events. And once you have these asymmetries in play, it really does make sense for us to think of the future direction in time as indeed very different from the past direction in time, even if these are merely asymmetries in how things are arranged in time. So here, time itself doesn't have a direction. It's just that lots of things we care about in time are directed in these ways. So that, I think, is an interesting sort of project to do in philosophy of time. And I'm just going to end with some reflections on how I think artistic work on the nature of time can sort of interact with this kind of philosophical project. So one thing that happens with artistic work on time is that we get a sense that how we represent time is not necessarily the same as time itself. So one of the big complaints that was made against these sort of scientifically informed views of time was that they made time static. So the thought was something like, look, if time is just kind of like a block without a flow or dynamic quality to it, you haven't given us time, you've given us something static. And I think the correct response to that is to say, yes, I've given you, a two-dimensional representation of time, but of course, some ways of representing time themselves are static. It wasn't to say we weren't representing something that was indeed dynamic. Okay. So again, bringing attention to the way representational qualities can change, what it is we seem to represent, even if the thing we represent is indeed dynamic in all cases. A second aspect is I think work in this area also helps highlight that there isn't just one single conception of time which we're trying to get right. So I started the story about the philosophy of time by talking about, a single idea of time with these certain features. A lot of artistic work on time will draw attention to the fact that, time is in a certain sense, numerous. There are kind of numerous ways we think and experience time, and it would be a mistake to think that there was just one thing, time, which could be represented equally well by all these different experiences that we have and ways of thinking about time. And finally, and this is something I get very excited about, I think work in this area can also help highlight how things like narrative and expectations, and particularly things like memory and recording, can kind of shape our experience of time. And it's precisely those kind of activities and resources that I think are required to fully understand how we come to experience and think about time as we do, even if we don't build in those features into a sort of scientific conception of time. That's all I had to say. Thank you.